Hey guys, so I wanted to talk about how I got started basically in my online art career, how I got my first client online. Um, for those of you who may be trying to do the same thing, I my first client came from Fiverr. I started my Fiverr account 2 years ago, and I didn't have any other kind of online presence. Basically, I had an Instagram account that I hadn't used in a while at that point. So 2 years ago, so I probably stopped using my Instagram. I don't know, maybe like a few months before that. I'm not great at social media posts. I don't really feel like putting the energy into them. Maybe someday in the future I will. We'll see. But I didn't have a Facebook. I didn't have any other way of getting my name out there or my work out there. I just started a Fiverr account and it took, maybe like a month ish before I got my first order. And all of my messages up until that point were basically spam messages. So don't be surprised if you start a Fiverr account that you're just getting a bunch of spam. That's pretty normal from what I hear. Just report it and move on. So I started off by watching some YouTube tutorials, things like that, talking about how to get your first orders, how to get more clicks, how to understand, your analytics, I guess, on Fiverr, and how to kind of use that to your advantage. And I also started looking through a bunch of other Fiverr gigs that I thought looked kind of similar to what I would be interested in doing. Obviously, art related stuff. And then I went ahead and I made my 7 gigs. You're allowed to make a maximum of 7 when you first start, and you can make as few as you want. But I made 7 because I wanted to maximize my visibility. And I kind of spread my interests out over multiple things. I talk about this in my other video about how I decided, to focus on children's book illustration and board game design and stuff. But I wasn't sure at this point what I wanted to do. So I had a lot of different things. I put my eggs in a lot of different baskets just to kind of see what would catch something. So I had like an illustration gig, I had a black and white illustration gig, I had a 2D animation gig, I had a sprites gig for video games, I had like a horror creatures concept art gig or something like that. I had a comic strip gig and a storyboard gig and a 2D animation gig. And what I had learned from watching those videos on how to get your first order was that you have to basically stay active with it. You can't just make the gig, and even though you did all kinds of research on what the perfect gig would look like and the perfect prices and stuff, you make the gig and you just leave it there. And eventually somebody will find it, right? Wow, look at you. Oh, man. Well, that's not always the case. I think that's very rarely the case. You have to stay active with it. You have to make changes and keep it up to date. And that's what I did to get my first gig. Was basically I learned how to look at impressions. That's just people just seeing your little seeing what you're offering. Clicks, it's them actually clicking on it, and then orders. Obviously I had no orders at this point, but I could at least monitor my impressions and clicks. So I looked at my 7 gigs, and the ones that I saw were not getting very many impressions at all, which is people just seeing it. Those needed to have a big change made, right? Like because nobody's seeing them. So something is wrong. I'm not using the right tags. I'm not using the right title. I'm not using the right something. Like nobody's looking for what I'm trying to sell here. So I had to go in and tweak stuff, find, like, look again at what other people were getting to sell and change my gigs to reflect that a little bit more, just to at least get people to see them. And then with clicks, say it has, like, the gig that I put out there has a lot of impressions, but very few clicks. Well, it's going to need a big change as well, because people are finding it, but it's not interesting at all. So maybe the picture that you've chosen needs to change, or your starting price needs to change. Now that's the tough thing, right? And one of the reasons that I left Fiverr, I can talk about all of that in more detail later, but you're competing with the world, people selling from all over the world. So everybody has different monetary needs, right? So somebody from another part of the world may not need to make as much, but they can make amazing art. So your amazing art is going to look less appealing because you have to charge more to survive. And that was something that I did struggle a lot with at first, was having to compete with very low prices. And I was okay with it at first because I wasn't in a position where I like needed money right now, right? I was okay. So I could kind of go for the lower prices just until I had exposure, just until I had more, I had some ratings, some clicks, some clients, just until then. And there might be people who say that that's not a good thing. That's what I did. And it worked for me. So I basically just did that. I kept going through, and I would do this every day. Every single day, I would go in to all of my gigs. I would look at what people were seeing, what people were clicking on, and I would change every single one of them just a little bit if it needed, or a lot if it was doing really poorly. Or I would just get rid of it entirely and make a totally new one because it was basically doing so bad that it just needed a complete overhaul. So I would just get rid of it and start a new one. That was actually told to me by this person, or some of these people that I was watching, about how to get your first order. Just scrap the gigs that are not getting any attention. So eventually I was getting, more impressions, more clicks, and less spam messages, which was good. And then finally, and this blew me away actually, I finally got my first order, and it was for a 2D animation. And I think, this is just me speculating, but I think it's because 2D animation was not in a super overly saturated category with people offering this service, which is, I don't know, maybe it's surprising, maybe it's not. I think a lot of people are transitioning to 3D animation and offering those kind of services, and 2D animation is just less popular now. But somebody wanted to order a 2D animation from me, and the final cost of that animation was like somewhere in the $500 range, but I only made about 400 something because of the 20% that Fiverr takes from what you make. One of the other reasons that I transitioned off of Fiverr. And it was like a 1.5 to 2 minute long animation. Fortunately, it was a very simple animation, just black and white, just line art. So that was good. So it wasn't really too bad, but I did get a very nice first experience with working with a client who was lovely, by the way. This person was very nice. I was very fortunate to have a really cool first client. And I got to learn about you know, how Fiverr works and all that good stuff. And it went well. I completed the project, and I gave myself way too little time. Be careful about that. Don't tell people that. That's another thing that you have to compete with, is people having very fast turnover rates, right? I did that at first, and it was really tough to keep up with, you know, other people offering to finish this thing in 3 days, when I'm like, oh my God, it would take me 2 weeks to finish that at a reasonable pace, you know? So don't put yourself in that corner, okay? Try to take care of yourself. But yeah, so I guess that's basically what I did. And then after that, it was really interesting. I seemed to get, as soon as I was almost done with one order, I would get another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one. It was like right after that first order, I suddenly was noticed. And people, like, I had 1 5-star review, and people suddenly trusted me. And like I said, this is 2 years ago. Fiverr may have changed a bit since then. I have not used it to get a client in a while, and I'll make a video on that in the future of how I transitioned off of Fiverr. It may have changed a bit, but the main things that I did was I, you know, spread out my feelers. I researched, you know, what was working for other people. I looked at other people's gigs, and I was consistently going in and tweaking things, keeping things up to date, keeping stuff moving in, like, within my gigs, changing things, seeing what that did to my numbers, to keep up with, I mean, the algorithm. You're trying to beat the algorithm, right? You just need to get those views. You need to get those clicks, because that's how you make sales. But yeah, that's how I got my first order. If you have any questions about that, please ask about working on Fiverr or anything like that. I do plan on making a few more videos about it, because it was a very interesting experience, very enlightening experience. But that's what I had to do. I know other people who just made gigs and just let them sit, and we're like, well, it's a great gig, so why aren't people just clicking on it? Well, because after a while of it just sitting there, it goes to the bottom of the list of what people will see when they type in, when they search that thing. So you have to keep it moving. You have to keep it updated. Yeah, that's basically my advice for it. Hopefully this made sense, and I kept things on topic. I struggle with that sometimes. If you liked it, like the video. If you didn't like it, let me know why. And ask a question if you have a question. And subscribe if you want to. And I'll see you in the next one.